I'm very grateful to be here today. The presentations have been amazing, and I hope what I have to share can find an application or association with something everyone's been talking about in the presentations to come as well. How many of you are familiar with this thing, Bitcoin? Raise your hand. Wow, that's a lot. That's good. And of those of you who raised your hands, let's just do thumbs. How many of you have a positive opinion of it, maybe an unsure, so-so opinion, or a negative opinion? Let's see those thumbs. Okay. Not as many down thumbs as I might have thought. That's good. I guess my work isn't going to be so difficult up here. Well, I want to share with you some comments of some other people whose names you might recognize and what they think about Bitcoin. So Bill Gates considers Bitcoin a technological tour de force. And Eric Schmidt, CEO of Google, says Bitcoin is a remarkable cryptographic achievement, and the ability to create something that is not duplicable in the digital world has enormous value. He should know. The inventor of the internet himself chimes in too. Al Gore likes Bitcoin. He says, I think the fact that within the Bitcoin universe an algorithm replaces the functions of the government is actually pretty cool. I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. And you might not expect this coming from this group, but the Bank of England says Bitcoin is a genuine technological innovation which demonstrates that digital records can be held securely without any central authority. And that's what I'll be getting into today. I thought I might have to spend a lot of time on what Bitcoin is not if we had a lot more down thumbs. So I'll go quickly through that. Bitcoin's not a company. It's not an organization. It's not owned or controlled by one or a few group of people. It's not a scam, a pyramid scheme, a Ponzi. It's not a fad. It's not anonymous, despite what you may have heard, and it's not untraceable. In fact, quite the opposite of both of those. There's a lot of work that a user needs to go through in order to be anonymous on the internet. The same is true with Bitcoin. Think of Bitcoin as censorship resistant. I think that's maybe the disconnect folks are struggling with when they call it anonymous or untraceable. It's censorship resistant. And Bitcoin's not backed by nothing. I'll be explaining more about that too. So here's a couple quick statements or analogies of what Bitcoin is. It's an open source, peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It's free, it's open, and it's very secure. It's a network of computers that talk to each other and run the same software and update the same file and secure it and audit it constantly in real time together. And it's the native currency of the internet. It's the first time we have a money designed specifically for use on the internet. And if you've been following current events and credit card fraud stories like Home Depot, Neiman Marcus, Target, Sony, you understand why this is significant. A friend of mine, Andreas Antonopoulos, who has been one of the earliest proponents and best public speakers on the subject, calls it the Internet of Money. I like to say that Bitcoin is the only currency in the world that no one is forced to use. And the fact that 5 million people or so are using it should tell us something. So at the core of Bitcoin, it's really an invention. It's an invention of two important things. One is this beautifully designed incentive structure that promotes honest behavior and disincentivizes dishonest behavior, so much so that it's uneconomical to behave dishonestly in this system. So dishonest people are compelled to behave honestly. It's more profitable. And the invention behind Bitcoin has been called the blockchain. You may be hearing lots more about that since I've planted the little earworm there. But that's really, when I say Bitcoin, you may have seen maybe the little orange bee brand or things like that. I'm really including all of these blockchain technologies that have sprung up since this thing was invented 5 years ago when I say Bitcoin, so just stick with me there. This blockchain is not too difficult for any of you to grasp. It is a computer science profound solution to a problem that was thought to be unsolvable, namely the Byzantine generals problem. How can two computers communicate messages to each other and be sure on both sides that the message wasn't corrupted or intercepted or anything in between? That was a problem posited in 1975, and the creator of Bitcoin solved it in 2008, and people thought that he was ridiculous, he, she, or they, because this creator is anonymous and has remained so and faded into the darkness, is not involved in the community or the efforts to grow this technology anymore. Think of this blockchain as a great ledger of truth. It's a series of entries that are secured and buried for all time. So you may hear this thing, Bitcoin is mined. Bitcoins are really buried. They're embedded. And the older an event or transaction happened, the more valid, the stronger, the more irrevocable or inviolable it becomes. That's very different from how we view, like, let's say, our history books or human knowledge throughout history, which gets faded and weaker and foggier the older it gets. So that's pretty profound in and of itself. Bitcoin was loosed on the world by Satoshi Nakamoto on January 3rd, 2009. And again, this ledger is shared by all of these computers, and there's so many innovations that can be built on top of this thing. This is why I said my statement about gratitude at the beginning of my talk, because all of the talks, including words towards encouragement towards creativity, innovation, thinking outside the box, and finding solutions to tough problems. It's what excites me so much about Bitcoin. This file that is shared by everyone is immortal. They're even going to put a copy in space. And it's basically shared around the globe, and what it does is it documents provable facts. And these facts are transactions, time-stamped. Right now, about $50 million to $500 million of transaction volume goes through the Bitcoin network every day, a big range. So a boilerplate definition of Bitcoin, it's really three things you'll hear talked about. It's a protocol, it's a network, and it's the currency. I'm going to try to go quickly through each of those so we can talk about some big picture stuff. So protocol, we're familiar with these. They kind of live in the background of our online life, and of course we have offline protocols we work around as well. But much like TCP/IP is the internet's protocol, and HTTP is web browsing protocol, and SMTP is the email protocol, so too is Bitcoin, the Bitcoin protocol. It's software, it's an algorithm, it's a system that lets all these computers update this great ledger of truth. Bitcoin, the network, it's the group of computers all together. All of these people who downloaded this program and started running it. And that creates a peer-to-peer network, peer-to-peer connections, no intermediaries, no central point of failure. It's the most robust and secure and powerful computer network in the whole world. Indeed, it's the largest computing experiment that mankind has ever performed. A big statistic I like to throw out is it's 12,000 times stronger than the top 500 supercomputers in the world combined. That's all these people around the world working on this. Just to give you some perspective on that, I've been giving similar talks for almost a year, and last winter, around January, that number was about 250. 250 times bigger or more powerful than the top 500 supercomputers combined. So despite what you may see on the price chart, this year anyway, this thing is growing. And then there's the small b Bitcoin, lowercase b, the monetary unit, the digital store of value, the currency. It has some very special traits, and we're going to go through these. Aristotle posited 4 criteria for a good money. These were portability, durability, fungibility, and intrinsic value. Bitcoin satisfies all of these better than any other money humankind has ever used. I'm not going to go through the top three, but the last one's a bit sticky for folks, so we can touch on that one a bit. Why does Bitcoin have value? Well, it's impossible to counterfeit. There's no central issuer. It has a fixed rate of issuance and a fixed total supply. So that means Bitcoin is scarce. And we know things that are scarce have value. At the very least, Bitcoin is a collectible. But Bitcoin has value for more reasons than just that. It's very useful. So utility is also something that gives things value in our society. The ability to send a transaction of any size, anywhere around the world, to anyone you want, with no intermediary, with the ability to tell you no or take a fee instantly, that's pretty valuable. We've never had that. I mean, we have the internet that connects us instantly around the world to anyone, sharing information, communication, but now we can do that with transfers of value. Software has value. We're familiar with this. I know a friend of mine who spent $10,000 on Candy Crush lives. People pay for software. I mentioned the great ledger of truth. Well, how do you make an entry on this thing? If everyone has access freely, you need to possess some of the small b bitcoins, the currency, to have the right to make an entry on the ledger. And what's special about this is it doesn't matter if you have $1 million worth of bitcoins or a single Satoshi, which is 1/100 millionth of a bitcoin. That's right now the smallest level of divisibility of Bitcoin, but you can add more zeros later if you need to. They each have the same right to make an entry in the ledger. So what's Bitcoin backed by? It's backed by people, the network that runs it. Everyone in the network accepts Bitcoin, and people give things value. We trade with each other, and the price at that point is the value of the goods that were traded. Also, we know networks have value because we've experienced network effects. If you're on Facebook, if you're a part of social media networks or any kind of real network, you know that you're the product Facebook is selling to its advertisers, which has value to them, which gives Facebook value. So networks have value. And I've debated going out there on this limb, but I think I will. It's a little out there, but basically Bitcoin is backed by time itself. So Bitcoin is governed and measured by time. And it's the scarcest resource known to humankind. Bitcoin events or transactions are irreversible. They're one way. Only the owner of Bitcoins can spend them. There's no pull transactions. This makes it distinctly different from our current payment systems, banking systems, where we give our private information over to hopefully a trusted third party, and we trust them to secure our private information, and we also trust them to take the appropriate amount or the agreed upon amount out of our accounts. So Bitcoin puts more control in the hands of people by preventing your gym membership from continuing to debit your account if you're not living in that same town or you just don't want to go to the gym anymore. That's a simple example, but there's several I'm sure you all can think of. One way to view the Bitcoin blockchain, this great ledger of truth, is as a combination of a family tree mixed with a history timeline. And like I said a minute ago, the older these entries or events took place in this timeline, the stronger, more valid, more irrevocable they become. A lot of people today have been talking about transformational things, and Bitcoin is truly transformational. It's transformational for me personally, but beyond that, the kinds of inventions that can spring forth from this black swan kind of invention are just mind-boggling and really exciting, and I hope they'll excite you too. Bitcoin really makes us think differently about a couple different things that we've taken for granted or that we hold as constants in society, like trust, or risk, or property, or value, or peace. For example, trust. Bitcoin's trustless. It enables people to do business with each other without ever meeting, while being strangers, perfect strangers. And in fact, you can do honest business with someone with criminal tendencies or just a bad actor because of the nature of this trustless network. Risk. Risk is hard to define, but I like to point out the fact that Bitcoin is anti-fragile. And this is different than just being robust. If something's anti-fragile, it emerges from damage or stress or anything like that stronger than before it encountered that threat or that attack. We've seen this with Bitcoin repeatedly and continue to. What about economic growth and wealth creation? Well, all growth happens from learning. And the real wealth of our world, of our society, is knowledge. And Bitcoin's open source. Bitcoin gives open access to the knowledge of a transaction ledger that's shared globally. I challenge any of you to go to your bank and ask for their ledger. See if you can audit it for them. They probably won't freely submit that information. Indeed, our society right now secures or sequesters or suppresses knowledge. Banks, governments, corporations, we're all familiar with the stories in the last 6, 7 years. Equality. I mentioned earlier, Bitcoin's neutral. It doesn't care if you have a little bit or a lot, much like the internet doesn't care if you're an Egyptian blogger or New York Times. The bits and bytes, the packets of information, they get equal treatment on the internet. Same thing with Bitcoin. It also gives anyone the access to sophisticated financial tools, the likes of which are used by central banks, the very richest of the rich folks in our world. You can be your own bank with Bitcoin. You can be your own Western Union. Incentives. I talked a little bit about those earlier, but it's really elegant how this was put together to create honest behavior in such a way that the dishonest behavior is rendered irrelevant, or that bad actors, and I'm talking about just the Bitcoin protocol, the operation of the software itself, are incentivized not to attack the network because it's completely unprofitable. In fact, if you were to try to damage or attack the Bitcoin network right now, you would have to spend about $1 billion for 10 minutes, and then the next 10 minutes have to spend another $1 billion to attack it and kill it. And it can't be killed because it's anti-fragile. So I'm going to go through a couple of big picture ideas with the little time I have left. Here's some future applications for Bitcoin to just kind of get your minds working. Fair voting, transparent fair voting systems. Decentralized organizations, companies that have everyone working remotely and working together simultaneously and not needing to trust payments going directly, embezzlement or anything like that, because you've never met these people. You can still do business honestly together. Machine-to-machine payments, machine-to-business payments, machine-to-consumer payments, micropayments and micro-lending, which has implications for the third world big time. Autonomous agents, smart contracts, smart law. Those sound weird, but basically they're automated executions of agreements. So there will never be fraud there because the machines will execute the way the rules were drawn up by the parties before it was set into motion. Protocols as jurisdictions instead of borders. Protocols as risk management. Deeds, wills, trusts. Stocks. In fact, the whole stock market. We could benefit from having a more transparent stock market. Libraries. You can put books into this software, volumes of texts into this software, and they will be there more vividly, more securely, the longer they go. Overstock accepts Bitcoin, Dish Network accepts Bitcoin, Expedia accepts Bitcoin, PayPal just recently, the Sacramento Kings. Migrant workers use Bitcoin for remittance payments to save anywhere from 5 to 20%. The poorer the country, the higher the cost of sending those remittance payments. That's something that Bitcoin is changing, and it's free access. Tens of thousands of small businesses can double their profit margins if they have low profit margins, and they shoe credit cards for Bitcoin instead. And there's tons of charities doing such great work. Homeless charity in South Florida called Sean's Outpost has fed over 100,000 meals to homeless people using only Bitcoin. There are projects all over the world making the world a better place using this technology. And I'll close with this. I would just like to plant a seed that this new tool is freely available for anyone to use and experiment with and build upon. And if you have taken any of the lessons from any of our talks today, perhaps your creativity has been stimulated and you can go home and take a peek at this technology and just imagine the new possibilities that you've never thought were possible before, because this invention now exists. And it gives us that potential to create some incredible new things that people have never imagined. Thank you.